Let's welcome to the stage ECC board member Jack Hartung with the introduction to our next session, Disruptive Thinking, Fostering a Culture of Game-Changing Leadership.
Good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Luke Williams. Professor Williams holds an appointment on the faculty of New York University's Leonard N. Stern School of Business, where he's also the executive director of entrepreneurship and founder of the W.R. Berkeley Innovation Lab. He holds more than 30 U.S. patents and has designed more than 100 products in a broad variety of industries, including transportation and finance and healthcare and consumer electronics. In addition to this one, he's addressed audiences around the world, including the UN General Assembly and the World Economic Forum. He has been featured in publications such as Bloomberg Businessweek, Fast Company, The Wall Street Journal, and The Economist. He's also the author of the international bestseller, Disrupt, Think the Unthinkable to Spark Transformation in Your Business. Professor Williams will combine his insights in both disruptive thinking and leadership to speak to us about disruptive thinking, fostering a culture of game-changing leadership. As a brief background, given the rapid pace of change in our industry today, our paradigms of the past may not work in the future. In short, what we are working in is an environment that Professor Williams would deem a disruptive age. The scale of the challenges we face and the need to establish new paradigms and innovations demand a new approach to innovation leadership, a new way of fostering counterintuitive ideas, forcing improbable insights, and opening our minds to uncomfortable solutions. As many of our organizations are seeking to reinvent how we approach our business in the future, his lessons on disruptive leadership will prove quite valuable. To quote him, disruptive leadership is about fostering a culture of game-changing innovation that provides the framework and motivation to generate ideas and execute solutions. It is an essential skill for any business leader, in a small startup to a global corporation, who has the desire to transform organizational processes and behaviors and ask simply, why hadn't we ever thought about our business and culture in that way before? With that as a backdrop, please join me in welcoming Professor Luke Williams.
Thanks, Jack. That was great. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Wow, that was, Jack, fantastic introduction. Best ever, I think. Actually, there's almost nothing for me left to say. Actually, introductions are so embarrassing. I've always thought it's much more fun if you're in the audience. Instead of, watching Jack, try and find the speaker. They're normally out the front, cowering away in a corner somewhere, fiddling with their shoes or their socks, hoping the ground opens up to swallow them whole. It's literally the most embarrassing 30 seconds of anyone's life. Jack's went on a bit longer than usual, so I had some time to think over there. I was thinking, wow, everyone should have an introducer. I mean, wouldn't it be great? You're at a restaurant or a bar out there and you see someone across the room you'd just love to meet. Wouldn't it be fantastic to be carrying Jack around your pocket, just pull him out at these opportune moments? This is Luke Williams, Professor of Innovation. I think you guys should talk. Never happens, because then I'd have to explain, who's this crazy guy you just pulled out of your pocket, and around we go. Excited to be with you guys. I think what ECC has done in bringing you together, and particularly the theme on leadership, diversity, innovation, it is spot on. Because the diversity in this room, the opportunity to actually exchange ideas with each other, it's profound, but it's fleeting. The psychologists at NYU have a name for this bias that we all share. They call it self-similarity principle. We just love to surround ourselves and get comfortable with people that are similar to us, reinforce our own point of view on the world. In fact, I came across a research study in 2007 by our counterparts at Columbia University. They wanted to see how business managers and executives like yourselves mixed with other managers and executives from completely different functions and industries. So they invited them to a cocktail party. Because they thought, this is where this mixing naturally happens. We're going to find a really small room, we're going to throw everyone together and ply them with alcohol. Magic's going to happen. Now, the stated objective for these managers and executives was pretty simple. They had to try and meet as many other different managers and executives as possible from different industries to expand their social network. Now, of course, They all said, yeah, no problem. I'm great at getting out of my comfort zone. I speak to new people all the time. But the researchers, Paul Ingram and Michael Morris, were able to track every conversation that happened because they slipped a little RFID tag in everybody's name badge without them knowing. You've got to be careful of these name badges. And what they found was the complete opposite happened. So the bankers just hung out with the other bankers. The marketers just chit-chatted with the other marketers. The accountants somehow found the other accountants and started talking accounting. Which always makes me laugh because I can't imagine anybody else in that room really running to be in that conversation. But anyway, the researchers concluded, and this is in ink in the report, you can read this, that the only person that successfully achieved the objective of many different managers and executives from different industries as possible to expand their social network during the course of the party was the bartender. If there's one thing we know about innovation, it's this mixing of ideas and perspectives. It has to happen. Now, it's fleeting and profound here. While you're out of the office, you're away from your team members, you have that opportunity, but you have to force it to happen. You have to figure out how to be the bartender. But let me back up. I actually don't take it for granted that anyone in this room is sitting there motivated to innovate. In fact, I suspect you've even got what I call innovation fatigue. So sick of being told you've got to change everything you're doing and replace it with something entirely new. Oh, innovation, disruption, it's just another management fad. I'm going to wait it out for the next one. So I don't take it for granted that everyone's sitting there motivated to innovate, particularly lead innovation. But I do take it for granted that everyone in this room has a vested interest in growth. Growth of your business, growth of your customer or clients' businesses, growth of the industry overall, professional development growth, which is why you're at a leadership forum like this. If you've got a vested interest in growth in any of its forms, you have to be interested in innovation because it's innovation that drives growth. Now, this sounds like a relatively obvious statement. You think, well, yeah, of course, without new ideas, we can't have progress. This is a new understanding of how growth in a business and an economy is generated. Because it used to be that all theories of growth were rooted in the scarcity of the material world. Things like oil, gold. If customers buying from you, they're not buying from me. We're all competing over these finite commodities and resources. I mean, imagine, it's 1849. The first nugget of gold's been discovered in this sleepy little town called San Francisco. Jose, you're first down there, you're panting for gold. Nobody's around you. How are you feeling? Jose's feeling good, as you can tell by that reaction. Now, all of a sudden, all your colleagues start turning up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They're all panting for gold around you. How are you feeling now?
Probably panic as well, yeah.
Yeah. Not as good because there's not as much gold for Jose now. Right? And actually, all the accessible gold within the California gold rush ran out in 2 years. So the more gold seekers, the more fortune seekers that turned up to this sleepy little town called San Francisco to seek their fortune, the faster the gold ran out. Now, the important point of this story and this mindset is that the world of things like commodities and the world of ideas like knowledge, they don't work the same way, but we often treat them as though they did. Imagine something as trivial as a chair. Right, imagine Jack comes up the stage again, gives me a chair and says, Luke, you look tired already, have a seat. Go, well, thanks, Jack, this is great. Now I can sit down. This tangible, physical product meets my user need, and I'm a happy man. Now imagine Jack comes up again. Says, Luke, you look so happy with one chair. Obviously 2 chairs is going to make you even happier. So, well, thanks, Jack. It's really generous of you, but what on earth am I going to do with a second chair right now? I mean, maybe if I thought hard enough about it, I could put my feet on it. And then Jack comes up again. Because let's face it, secretly I think he likes being on stage. But anyway, comes up again. He says, Luke, you look so happy with 2 chairs. Obviously 3 chairs is going to make you ecstatic. So, well, thanks, Jack. Again, very generous of you, but 3 chairs are completely useless to me right now. So 1 chair, high value. 2 chairs, not so much. 3 chairs, completely useless to me. Everything in the physical world is subject to decreasing value, diminishing returns. This is why you don't pay as much for a used car as you do for a new one. But the idea of a chair, and we define ideas as the recipes that you use to rearrange things to create new value and wealth. The recipe for a chair, and of course there is one, it was just invented so long ago, we've all forgotten about it. But somebody had to work out how you take raw materials out of the ground, how you mold them into components, how you form those components into the shape of a chair, how you get the chair out of the distribution system and out to customers. The recipe for a chair becomes more valuable the more it's consumed. So the more people using that recipe for a chair, the more valuable it becomes. Because you can add your ideas to the recipe for a chair to make a stronger recipe. You can add your ideas to the recipe for a chair to make a stronger recipe. So ideas are subject to increasing returns. Now, I'm not a professor of economics, so I like to think about these abstract economic terms in a pretty simple way. I mean, imagine you're eating a bowl of mixed nuts. So the next time you're eating a bowl of mixed nuts, I know you've all got a nut preference out there, those who can eat nuts. Me, I'm a cashew guy. I love cashews. If I've got a bowl of mixed nuts, I'm picking out all the cashews as fast as I can eat them. Happy as a pig in mud. All of a sudden, what happens? All the cashews are gone, and I'm left with all the nuts I don't want to eat. That's diminishing returns. Now imagine, for every cashew I eat, another cashew goes into the bowl. In fact, I can't eat all the cashews fast enough because they're replenishing faster than I can eat them. Heaven. And this is why any energy that you expend in your organizations, as either innovators yourselves or leaders of innovation, generating a constant stream of bold new ideas, new recipes for the resources or ingredients in the projects you're managing. Every time that you spend time generating a new recipe, it is never time wasted because you're in the realm of increasing returns. And this is a critical mindset change because I know you're all out there saying, oh yeah, innovation's important. We want new thinking. We tell our people all the time, we want their ideas. But what you really mean is you only want their successful ideas. Anything less than a successful idea, you think, well, that was a waste of time. We could have been working on, a million other things. Our core business. And this is the first critical thing for anyone involved in innovation. You have to change your mindset on ROI. Start treating ideas as items of investment in their own right. They're another form of currency. If you have one idea, you can purchase another idea. In academic terms, we refer to this as building innovation capital. Your job as leaders of innovation is to get your organizations into a position where you've got more innovation capital to spend than your competitors. Because the old days of strategy where we knew exactly where we were going, option A, the next 5 or 10 years we know exactly what we're doing, we've got our investments, all our strategic plan lined up. Those days of certainty are over. Everyone has to get their organisations into a position where they can do option A, option B, option C, option D, option E, or any combination of those depending on how their circumstances change. Another way of saying this is you've got to find a way to increase the exchange of ideas, increase the rate of ideas having sex in your organisation. So Nim, where are you from?
London.
So London's going to have sex with, where are you from?
Houston.
London's going to have sex with Houston. Where are you from, Dan? Cincinnati. Houston's going to have sex, maybe not Cincinnati. I mean, this is why I was so excited about coming to a conference from the ECC. There's a hell of a lot of sex going on here. Nervous laughter, okay. There's never been a more important time to be experimenting with this new arrangement of ingredients in your organisation. Now, whether this is the value you provide, whether the customers that you serve, the relationship you have with your customers, it could be the key channels you're using to communicate and get the value to the customers. It could be the key activities that you do as project managers, as a firm. It could be the key partners and suppliers in your network. It could be the key resources that you have available, whether it's financial capital or brand or physical infrastructure. The cost structure of the business, the revenue model, all of these things are ingredients that can be remixed and rearranged in an infinite number of ways. And this is what innovation is about. It's nothing more than rearranging ingredients. It's not about inventing something new, but But if you've got a dropping oil price and you need to find a way to manage your projects more efficiently, it means just a willingness to look at all the ingredients you've got available and seek a new arrangement that makes those ingredients more valuable. Never been a more important time because of this amount of uncertainty. You know, my mother in Australia, actually she's my mother everywhere, that sounded funny. Even if she was here, she'd still be my mother. She's obsessed with the weather. Now growing up, well actually I live on the East Coast now, and the weather on the East Coast has been so insane over the last 18 months, I'm literally checking my phone app like 5 times a day to check the weather. So I'm back in Australia for the holidays, and I didn't even have data roaming turned on because the exorbitant charges of AT&T. But I'm still in the habit of pulling out my phone to check the weather, and it got me thinking, how on earth, growing up, did I ever find out about the weather before I had an app? And it occurred to me pretty quickly that my mother was the app. She always knew. She could even give you a pollen count. We're talking about the weather once, and she said, Luke, sometimes they do a pretty good job of forecasting 2 weeks in advance. Other times they can really only get it right 2 days in advance. But more often than not, she was frustrated at the time. She said they can't even get it right in the next 2 hours. And it feels to me a lot at the moment, the more I travel around, the current business environment that we're all operating in resembles the weather. We're entering a new 2-hour era of business where it's getting exponentially harder to work out what even the near-term future is going to look like, which has executives and workers from boardrooms to cubicles in every conceivable industry, all struggling with the same core questions. Questions like, what does competitive, sustainable advantage even mean anymore? I mean, what are the skills that matter most for my organisation when the most important skill seems to be the ability to learn new skills? I mean, how do you even start to think about balancing risk and opportunity where the very fundamentals of your industry may change overnight? I mean, these are tough questions. Think about the rate of change that we've seen in a device that you use every day. And I bet if you left the hotel room without this device this morning, you'd be feeling naked, patting yourself down in a fit of panic. What am I talking about? Yeah, we don't even call them cell phones anymore, though, do we? We call them smartphones. Guys, can we have the microphone down a little bit, please? Getting too much of an echo. It's almost impossible to pick up the newspaper any day of the week and not see some change in fortune in the global smartphone market. I mean, the other day we were just all up in an uproar about the headphone jack being taken out, which makes it hard to recall that it was only 3 short years ago, there was only 7 or 8 short years ago that this market was completely dominated by only 3 competitors, 64% of the global smartphone market. Does anyone remember who they were? Nokia. Motorola, Ericsson wasn't one of them. So Motorola, Nokia, and Research in Motion with a BlackBerry. Actually, raise of hands here. I would be curious in this audience. I haven't seen any out yet, but they might be hiding. Is anyone still using a BlackBerry? Oh, we got one. I love it. He gets dobbed in by his colleague. So 1, keep the hands up. 2, oh, well, there we go. Really, 2? Sorry, guys, that wasn't meant to be a public shaming exercise. But you do need to form a support group, I think. You also got the iPhone. But why are you using it still?
Personal company.
Company makes you use it?
Yes.
Who was the other one using? It's your hometown. So the normal explanations are, love the physical keyboard, my thumbs are too big for that damn screen, or work makes me use it, but I got an iPhone as well, data security if you're in government, Obama's still using his BlackBerry, but this is the funniest explanation I've just heard, which is, I'm Canadian. So I teach a graduate MBA class in innovation at NYU Stern School of Business, and we were discussing the case of BlackBerry in class one day, and one of the students was out on the weekend browsing antique stores, and in the window of this antique store was a BlackBerry with a sign on it, and they sent me a photo. Antique Canadian communication device, $20. I mean, this is great. We got $40 in this room right now. I'll give you 20 for both of them. But it wasn't that long ago. I mean, we were all teaching the case of BlackBerry in business school. I mean, we were talking about Crackberry. This is what you should aim for in everybody's products. gets some people so addicted that they actually start calling it by a name. BlackBerry was this status symbol of high productivity. If you wanted to prove to the world that you had superhuman proficiency, you had a BlackBerry. I can type 1,000 emails a minute on this thing. I'm on 24 hours 7. Just try and contact me on the weekend. I'll be playing golf, but I'll get back to you quick smart because I got a BlackBerry. But now, there was an article in the New York Times late last year talking about this phenomenon of business executives, if they were still using a BlackBerry for whatever reason, being so embarrassed by the fact that they were going into meetings with other executives hiding it under their papers and their folders because they didn't want to be publicly shamed and told that they were behind the curve. Now 2 different players are on top of the heap, Samsung and Apple, 2 competitors which, again, it's hard to remember were not even on the competitive horizon 8 years ago. Now, this complete swap in the global pecking order of a multi-billion-dollar industry, the speed of this change is unprecedented. So from the rise of Facebook to the fall of Blockbuster, from the downgrading of US government debt to the resurgence of the Brazilian economy and its rapid decline, there's no doubt we're all operating in a dramatically new world. And we're starting to see the pace of disruptive change accelerate in every industry. I mean, yes, it happened in Silicon Valley and the tech companies first, but now they're even running around Silicon Valley claiming the silicon has left the valley. Meaning every business is a technology business now. You want to open a shoe store, it's a technology business. George wants to open a law practice, it's a technology business. It's just the baseline. So now all these traditional disruptors, which have been focused on very quick turnaround industries where product life cycles are short, are now focusing on big industries where traditionally change has been slow. They've thought they've been protected through longer life cycles. Now they've all got their sights on the automotive industry, for instance, one of the longest product cycles in any industry. Now, despite this increasing pace of change, the more I travel around, the more businesses I work with, and I typically work with 50 companies a year, everything from startups to Fortune 100 companies, the more convinced I am that the executives in one industry are unaware of the accelerating pace of change in industries other than their own. And it's easy to see why this happens. We've all got so much to concentrate on in our own domains of expertise. It's hard to actually step back and connect the dots. But I often hear this expression, which is, oh, Luke, we don't need any more ideas. We've already got more ideas and initiatives than we know how to execute. But when I actually ask to see all the ideas and initiatives they're pouring all their energy and their finances into, just about 100% of the time, with very few exceptions, the ideas are incremental ideas. Ideas that support the current way of running a project. Ideas that support the current product or service, business model, offering. Again, it's easy to see why the incremental ideas are the only ones getting any traction, because if you're a leader, and most of you in this room are in some sort of leadership capacity, somebody comes to you with an idea for maybe managing a project in a different way, you're only going to okay that if you believe that is the right way to run the project. If you think this new arrangement of resources, this new idea is going to be successful. And the ideas that you think are successful are the ones that track best with your experience, the ones that are most familiar to you and everything you and the organisation have done in the past. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with success. It's what we all want. Nobody wants to run a project that's not efficient or effective. But the flip side of any success that you've experienced individually or in your organisations is that complacency sets in. And complacency is literally the most dangerous word in business because it leaves no room for possibility. Now, I don't know who this gentleman is. This guy is just the happiest guy I could find on the internet. And I'd like to keep this image in mind for an organisation or industry that's reached a certain level of success with the way they're operating and they're pretty satisfied with the way things are going. But of course, any industry that is only embracing incremental change to the way they're operating are getting themselves in an incredibly dangerous position. Because you're on a path. And in psychology, this is known as path dependence. You're on a path that's becoming narrower and narrower, and it's inevitable that at some point you're going to reach the end of this path where you cannot make any further incremental changes to your existing product, service, business model, offering. And by the time you do reach the end of this path, your customers have forsaken you for a new offering that nobody saw coming. We see this cycle of disruption happen again and again. I can't believe we're still talking about it. Blockbuster was a big disruptor in video rentals, and 2 guys with this crazy idea to mail out DVDs in little red envelopes pitched the idea to leadership at Blockbuster. And of course, we all know what happened. Leadership at Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix for $50 million and said no. Laughed them out of the boardroom. Said, we're Blockbuster. We don't need you guys. We don't need a little niche idea like this. We got 9,200 stores. But of course, the very assets that Blockbuster thought were advantages turned out to be disadvantages and prevented them from seeing the future. The biggest barrier that I see to organizations and industries, the biggest barrier that I see them trying to innovate is they're always trying to innovate around their existing asset base. Outsiders, entrepreneurs, the traditional disruptors don't have that same set of assets. They're free to actually see a solution from a new perspective. Now, the only time an organization, and the bigger the industry, the heavier the inertia, the only time an industry does change is when they're forced to. When they're backed into a corner, they have no other choice. We love management by crisis. You ever been in a crisis situation? Isn't it amazing the energy that's unlocked within the system? Nothing else has changed except this crisis, this response that you need to deliberately make. All of a sudden, budgets open up, money falls from the sky, people become available that were too busy before. Everyone likes to talk about this in terms of Kodak or Polaroid. Have you ever been in a discussion about Kodak or Polaroid? I bet most of you have at some point. The next time you're in a discussion about any of these businesses that we're talking about today, BlackBerry, Blockbuster, Kodak, Polaroid, etc., 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 there's a long list. Listen to the attitude that emerges from the participants in the conversation. I'll bet you find it's one of superiority through hindsight. Like, those guys at Kodak were so stupid. Like, how on earth did they not see the future of digital photography coming? I mean, it was so obvious. I mean, I definitely saw it coming. I once heard the former CEO of Polaroid deliver a commencement speech, and he was asked this question with the same sort of attitude from the audience members, like, why couldn't you guys change? He said, you know what, we knew we had to change. We had forums like this talking about the need to do things differently. We had customers telling us we need to do things differently. But he used an analogy I haven't forgotten, and that's of a car mechanic. He said, if you're a car mechanic, under no circumstances do you want to stick your hand into an engine that's running in order to change the fan belt. But this is exactly the dilemma for every organisation represented in this room. How do you stick your hand into an engine that's running in order to change the fan belt? Now, of course, I don't know how much work you're all doing on your cars these days, but the metaphor remains true. Your business model is your current engine. All those ingredients I mentioned before, the value you provide, your customers, the channels, the relationship you have with those customers, the key resources you have available, the activities that you do, your partner and supplier network, your cost structure, your revenue model, all of these things are an existing engine. You've got to keep running. In academic terms, we refer to this as sustaining innovation, just getting better and better and better. A little bit better, a little bit better. The fan belt that you need to change is the mental model. Meaning everyone in the organisation generally shares the same mental model of the way those ingredients and resources need to be arranged in order for you to be successful. So the first step to seeking new arrangements is starting to disrupt people's thinking, their mental model on how these things are meant to be arranged. This is about getting your organisations in a position where you're not spotting and reacting to changes in circumstances, like a lower price of oil, for instance. It's learning how to be the disruptive change, lead the disruptive change, being the ones that take your segment, category, and industry into the next generation of how they operate. If you're really going to lead disruptive change, you have to let go of the notion that this is meant to be a happy process where everyone is going to look this complacent. If you're really going to lead disruptive change, by definition, it's terrifying because you don't know what the answers are going to be. So everyone in the process looks far more like this. Now, who recognises this image? This is a famous image. Psycho. Right, which scene? The shower scene. Right. Janet Leigh's character gets stabbed in the shower. Actually, Alfred Hitchcock was the first director in cinematic history to ever kill off his leading lady in the first third of the film. An idea suggested by his wife, by the way, and it even shocked him. He's going, what? Do you know how much I'm paying her? There's no way we're getting rid of her that early. So as a result, nobody in the audience, they were so surprised by it, can remember where the film started out. Can anyone in this audience remember where this famous film started out? I don't mean geography-wise, I mean just in terms of story narrative. What happened? I heard bank over there. She embezzled money, exactly. Where from? Do you remember? Her employer. She did steal money from her employer. She did get into a car. Do you remember how much? Going for bonus points. I'll tell you, if you had a BlackBerry, you could have Googled it by now. She was working in a real estate agency. Somebody came in to buy a building or put a deposit on a building for $40,000 in cash. She was carrying on with this bloke there. They were having an affair, but going to get married, but dead broke. Didn't even have enough money to get married. She thought, wow, nobody's really going to miss this measly amount of money. I'm going to shove it in a suitcase, put the suitcase in the car, and she was on the run. Started getting dark, started raining, no one was chasing her. She sees the Bates Motel, thinks I'm going to call in here for a nice, hot, relaxing shower. And that's when she gets stabbed and killed, which completely caught the audience by surprise. They're going, who killed her? Why did they kill her? They did not even know the suitcase of money was in the car. I mean, actually, the fact that she actually embezzled money in the first place was really completely irrelevant to the storyline, which means you are amazing, actually, at paying attention to irrelevant information. It's a cornerstone of disruptive innovation, so well done. But Alfred Hitchcock was one of the pioneers of this technique. It's called a turning point. So a turning point has to catch the audience by surprise by delivering something completely unexpected, which sparks their curiosity. They cannot wait to see where this film is going next. But most importantly, a turning point always changes the trajectory of the film. So if it started out as a caper film, she stole a suitcase of money, she's on the run, it's now turned into a thriller. But turning points don't just exist in Hollywood or entertainment, they exist in business and industry. Anyone who's successfully created, any entrepreneur, disruptor who's successfully created change has created a new turning point that's taken their segment, category, industry in another direction. It's the difference between being good at prediction, and I'm not worried about anybody's ability in this room to be good at prediction. This is largely what got everyone in the room in the first place. This is still what we're teaching in business school, how to take data from the past, extrapolate that to try and get a sense of what's going to work in the future. There's far too much emphasis in today's organisations on getting better at prediction in a world where it's exponentially harder to predict, and far too little emphasis on deliberate provocation, meaning learning to take the ingredients and resources that you and everyone else has available and seek a new arrangement that makes them more valuable. Now let me give you an example of this, just to keep the horror film theme going. How many people here have seen The Shining? All right, good, that's most of the room. Now, for those who haven't, this is a horror film based on a Stephen King novel, directed by Stanley Kubrick. It's horrifying stuff, even today. It was done in the early 80s. As you can see, this woman is not having a good time. Now, there was a competition a few years ago. This was written up in the New York Times. There's quite a few of these online now, but this was the first. Now, the rules were simple. The participants in the competition had to take a famous film and create a new trailer for that film, which would shift people's perceptions of what the film was about. Now, all it was a rearrangement of the current ingredients. They couldn't add any new ingredients like film their own stuff. Here's what the winners came up with.
Meet Jack Torrance.
I'm outlining a new writing project.
He's a writer looking for inspiration.
Lots of ideas. No good ones.
Meet Danny.
Mr. Torrance.
He's a kid looking for a dad.
There's hardly anybody to play with around here.
What's up, Doc?
Jack just can't finish his book.
I don't want to sound melodramatic, but there's no way to make it economically feasible.
Here's to 5 miserable months.
But now, sometimes what we need the most is just around the corner.
I'm your new foster father.
I'd do anything.
Climbing up on Salisbury Hill,
I love it.
I could see the city light. My heart going boom, boom, boom. Son, he said, grab your things, I've come to take you home.
Shiny.
Now, for those who haven't seen The Shining yet, please do not see it now. That would not be a good idea. Well, what were the couple of ingredients they just had to rethink about? The ingredients still had to be there, but they just had to rethink of what that ingredients could be. What are a couple of, they cued this new perception of what the film could be about? What are the first things that come to mind? Soundtrack, right, the Peter Gabriel soundtrack. Actually, we've tried this at NYU. You can put Peter Gabriel in anything and it will soften it up, I swear. And this, another cue, another key ingredient. The narrator. Right, it seems like the same guy narrating every romantic comedy you've ever seen before. I mean, I'd love to know how much this guy gets paid. So, the important point here is the patterns that you have established in your head for what a romantic comedy is meant to sound like and look like are just as strong as the patterns you have in your head for what a horror film is meant to sound like and look like. So once these ingredients were rearranged, a new pattern snapped into place. And this is what insight is about. Insight is about a pattern shift. So every time you rearrange the resources and ingredients in your projects, if you're interested in growth, in your capacity to manage the massive projects that many of you are managing, every time you seek a new arrangement of those ingredients, new patterns will snap into place. Patterns that will become so obvious in their value, you'll literally slap your heads and go, why didn't we ever think about managing our projects in this way before? Now, this form of deliberately rearranging things that don't need to be rearranged is what we call disruptive thinking. It's important to distinguish between disruptive innovation, which is by definition having an impact on the marketplace, and the way you actually start this process, which is starting to alter the mental models that keep you and everyone else thinking about your business and industry in the same way. And this is a process like anything else. This isn't just for tech companies in Silicon Valley, small and agile companies. This can be applied by any organization in this room. But you have to treat it as rigorously as you currently treat finance, operations, marketing. It starts with learning how to arrange those ingredients to provoke a different question. And we call these uncommon questions that you haven't asked yourselves before disruptive hypotheses. You've then got to take these hypotheses and got to work out an opportunity to experiment with them. But once you've defined that opportunity and started to run those experiments, all those are a platform for coming up with ideas. And I can't emphasize this point enough. I work with so many organizations that believe if we just get more data, if we get better at analyzing the data we've got, this is going to take us into our future and lead us to our next innovation. I've been involved in innovation now for 20 years on 3 different continents. I've never seen that happen. The analysis of data is important, but it'll only ever get you 50% of the way there. The other 50% has to be supplied by the human imagination. You need ideas to make sense of data. Then you've got to take these ideas and shape them into solutions. Because as everyone in this audience knows, probably better than most audiences, there's a big difference between a solution and an idea. A solution is always practical, feasible, viable. Otherwise, you haven't yet reached a solution. Now, the only way to get from ideas to solution is through running lots of small, low-cost pilots, seeing what works. And then finally, you've got to convince others that you're expecting to make the change, whether they're internal or external stakeholders, that the advantages of making such a change are clear. This is where many people fall down. They blame, regulations, they blame their boss, they blame the board for not embracing change and their ideas. But people don't embrace change just because it's new and innovative. Disruption for disruption's sake is just annoying. It has to deliver value. Now, the only way you're going to convince them of that value is by always selling benefits and not novelty. But what I want to focus on the time we have remaining, I want to give you some key takeaways that you can use before you go home to actually start rearranging the ingredients, the resources in your projects, in your organization, in your industry to start provoking a new question. Now, this starts with a thorough understanding of what the ingredients are themselves. Now, the best place to start with that is surfacing what we call the cliches. Now, I know everyone's heard the term cliche before, but in this context and in business, we define cliches as the widespread beliefs that seem to govern the way everybody's thinking about and doing business in a particular space. And when you're sensitive to the need to actually surface the cliches in your business and industry, you'll find they're absolutely everywhere. Why? Because another term for cliches is best practices. We're all obsessed with best practices, modeling each other's best practices. Why? Because then we don't have to bother with the trial and error ourselves. I don't have time to spend money on trial and error. I'm just going to adopt an arrangement that somebody else has already proven. And this is why we're all locked into these best practices. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with utilizing best practices where you can, but always remember there is an exclusivity with best practices. Because they're labeled best, many people in your organization will not feel empowered to actually challenge that best practice, that best arrangement. So here are 3 filters that I recommend that you start to use on a day-to-day basis to start figuring out what the cliche ingredients in your industry and business are. Now, the more you can do this in your everyday lives, the easier it becomes. So first, think about the interaction cliches. Now, in your business, this could be the interactions that you have with the partners and suppliers in your network. So if projects have to be managed more effectively, you need ideas from partners and suppliers. You need to think about every step of the interaction you have with anyone in your value network. But think about, just to get in this habit of mind, start to build this habit of mind on a daily basis, think about the interactions you have with every product and service you interact with every day. For instance, how many people here, raise of hands, have stayed in a hotel before? All right, just seeing who's awake here. This is good. What's the set of interaction cliches involved in arriving at a hotel? Let's say you arrive by car. What happens? First thing that happens. Unload your luggage. Right. Then what? You walk in the front door and check in. Now, check-in is interesting. Check-in has a bunch of interactions involved, but they're the same at every hotel in the world, so we bundle them together and we label them check-in process. So everybody knows what to expect. Now, in academic terms, we refer to this bundling as a cliche unit. It's become a unit in its own right. Best practices are the same thing, they're cliche units. Wherever you hear jargon or acronyms being used in a meeting that are specific to your industry, cliche units are in play. If you want to start encouraging people to think differently about the interaction, you have to start breaking down the cliche unit. So if we were to break down the cliche unit of checking in, what happens? So you arrive at the hotel, they get your luggage, what happens next? Take your briefcase down, you stand in line, get to the front desk, what happens? First thing they ask for? Credit card and ID. Even if someone else is paying, they still want that damn credit card. Then what? No, before the key. Find you a room, so they verify the reservation. Normally give you something to sign, so this is the rate, here's the checkout time. Then, how many keys do you want? And then finally, do you need a hand with the luggage? And then finally, I'm beginning to think nobody stayed at a hotel here. Then you go to the room, but before you go to the room, they direct you to the room. Right, might be your first time in a hotel, you've got no idea where you are, so it's always, the elevator's down there to the right, sir. Which I always think that's code. It's a nice way of saying, sir, this interaction is now complete. Please leave. See how many other customers I've got to attend to? Stop asking me about the restaurant. Actually, while we're on the subject, what's the cliche checkout time for basically any hotel in the world? 12 noon. Why? Got to clean the rooms, got to get the next people in. Now, if you're managing a hotel, this is a form of what? The rooms are a form of what? You're managing? Turnover of your asset inventory, right? So it's 12 noon checkout is best practice for inventory management in hotels. Now, if you want to start challenging that, you just look at another industry that also manages inventory on a large scale. Start applying it there. You start to see how arbitrary some of these decisions are. Like rental car companies, for instance. They manage a lot of inventory, but do they say, you know, I'm sorry, George, I know it's 11 a.m. and you've got to drive to San Francisco, but you're going to have that car back by 12. Rental car companies have their own set of interaction cliches. Face-to-face interaction with a service agent, get you to complete a ton of paperwork, rent your cars by the day. This set of cliches is still very much in play. Try dropping a car back after a physical depot's been closed. The next filter to turn your attention towards are what are the product cliches involved? Now, you could do this with your service. You could do this with your project. What are the project cliches involved? What are the features and benefits we always expect to include? What are the cliche timelines we expect to include if you're doing it in project management? What are the cliche attributes we're always trying to advertise if this is our service? Again, the more you can do this in your everyday lives, the easier it becomes. Imagine something as trivial as a can of soda. If I had a can of soda with me, how much would you expect I paid for it? $1, right, so it's cheap and inexpensive. If I had an alien from outer space with me and they'd never tasted soda before, how would you prepare them for what it's about to taste like? It's going to taste sweet, lots of sugar. Now, if you saw an ad for it, what would a typical soda ad look like? The can's popped at the top, refreshing, bubbly. Who's getting refreshed? For a pretty girl, right? Pretty girl or guy. Young, beautiful, sexy people frolicking somewhere on an exotic beach, drinking copious amounts of the fizzy stuff. Coke and Pepsi wrote the rule book on aspirational advertising, literally spent millions trying to convince the world that this is not sugared water. It's the American way of life in a can. Enjoy the feeling. So soda's inexpensive, it tastes sweet, and it's advertised as aspirational. Now, these cliches are so obvious, you'd almost be embarrassed writing them down because they're not sophisticated enough. But this is exactly the point. The more seemingly natural the assumption you're making about your project, your business, your relationship with your customer, your partners and suppliers, the value you provide, the more obvious the assumption you're making, the easier it is to ignore the fact that you're making it. You have to surface these cliches. The third filter I recommend you look at are what are the price or cost cliches involved? How much do we expect to charge our partners and suppliers, our customers? How much are they expecting to pay? Are there discounts and other incentives in play? Are we bundling products and our services together? Are we pricing them separately? What's the best time of year to join a gym? January. Why? New Year's resolution. Right, I've just eaten too much, I drank too much over the holiday, and I'm going to do it this year, damn it. I bet everyone in this room who's wearing socks purchase their socks in pairs. So far, so good. Why have we always package price and purchase socks in pairs? Because we've only got 2 feet. Thank you, Steve, for having the courage to state the obvious. Now, that's a damn good reason. All cliches, all best practices are around for a damn good reason. It means they were a great idea, a great arrangement of resources at the time. And they might still be a great idea. But it's the very strength of the idea, it's the very strength of the recipe that keeps it protected. We're all so obsessed in business, running around, trying to spot the big problems that need to be solved. I bet 98% of your job is spent putting out fires. The faster you can solve a problem, the faster you can get on the next thing on your to-do list. The problem with problems is they're seductively clear. They're screaming for your attention, which typically means in your organization, problems are the only things getting any thinking attention. The richest areas for your future, the richest areas for the future of the industry and innovation are the seemingly unbroken aspects of the situation. The areas where nothing appears to be wrong. The whole point of disruptive thinking is paying attention to things that are normally ignored and not obvious. The whole point of disruptive leadership is directing other people's attention to those things. Leadership is all about attention direction at the end of the day. Where attention goes, the organization's energy flows. It's critical to surface these cliches because we don't realize what a change is coming in the industry. And I know we've seen a lot through the millennials, but we've barely scratched the surface. Does anyone know what this generation's called? 1 to 4-year-olds? What was it? No. Digital natives? No. No, we're through Z, but good. No, so we've gone X, Y, Z. Now we're back to alpha. So we're starting, all generations now starting at the start of the Greek alphabet. So this is generation alpha. Now, if anyone's seen a little 1 or a 2-year-old, pick up a phone or a tablet and slide that unlock feature across without reading a user manual because they can't read. It looks like they're ordering apps before they can even talk. Watch this little girl. The problem is with her technology. The problem is when she goes back to a traditional magazine. Now, I don't want anyone to miss this. She's about to test if her finger still works on her knee. Watch this. I mean, it's a little confronting, it's a little frightening. I was working with a truck leasing company not so long ago. Their business model was based on decisions that were made over 80 years ago, 80. Now, do they really believe they're lucky enough to be operating in business another 5, 10, 15, 20, 40 years? Their business is going to be driven by the same set of considerations, the same influences from consumer behaviour as the previous 80. It's highly unlikely. So the question for everyone in this audience, when you go back to your organisations and do this sort of audit of the cliches and the best practices, is to work out how many of the decisions that are influencing the way you think about your business and industry, the way you manage projects, how many of those decisions were made by somebody else in a different age and a different context. Now, only after surfacing them will you be able to work out which ones are there because they're still valid, and which ones are there for no other reason than historical continuity. Meaning, well, this is the way it's always been done, this is the best practice. Or the continuity of neglect. Meaning, well, this was never a problem, so we never had to look at it. You have to free yourselves from seeing things the way they are right now to have any chance of seeing what they might become. It's a difference between reinforcing the continuity and introducing deliberate discontinuity. Now, the final takeaways are, how do you actually take these cliches, these assumptions, and provoke them? Now, we call this form of provocation creating disruptive hypotheses. Now, I know you've all heard the word hypothesis before, particularly we've got a heavy engineering audience. With a hypothesis, we make a reasonable prediction that we can then test to validate. So if this remote control wasn't working, I'd make a reasonable prediction that maybe the battery's flat. So I'd change the battery. If it starts working, my hypothesis is correct. If not, I need to formulate a new hypothesis. This is the scientific method. Now that's great for keeping the existing engine running, the continuity. But if you want to introduce deliberate discontinuity to break a pattern of inertia in your organization, to remix or rethink the ingredients, you need to get in the habit of not making reasonable predictions, but making unreasonable provocations. So in terms of the remote control, we'd start thinking, well, why on earth does a remote control even need a battery at all? And the difference is profound. The whole point of a disruptive hypothesis is to give yourself and your organization permission to be wrong. Deliberate permission to be wrong at the start so you can get the organization in a position where you can see the right answer at the end. Because if you're coming up with a new idea new way of operating. Everyone in the room is nodding their head and going, yes, great idea. It means it's incremental. It means generic. It means somebody else will be doing it just as soon. So here are the 3 techniques. Take these cliches, and the first one is work out what you can literally turn on its head. Think about a swimmer kicking off a wall in a swimming pool, as we saw in the Olympics, swimming as fast as they can in the opposite direction. If there's a timescale, run it backwards. If there's a one-way relationship between 2 parties, reverse that relationship. If we go back to the soda example, we take for granted soda's inexpensive, it tastes good with all the sugar added, and it's advertised as aspirational. What if soda was expensive? What if we placed no importance on taste? We stop telling people it's going to change their lives and make them happy, and we just tell them it's going to give them a functional boost when they need it. And this, of course, was it's all right, guys, we've got time. Red Bull single-handedly created the energy drink market, launched at double the price of Coca-Cola and Pepsi in an incredibly price-sensitive market with a formula that nobody liked. People tell me now, Luke, I don't know what you're talking about. I love the taste of Red Bull. With my vodka, Chris. I can tell you, if you were in those original focus groups, you would have seen American consumers spitting this product out on the floor. And if anyone's ever been in a marketing focus group, you know if a customer spits your product out on the floor, not a good chance of that getting through the system. But they worked out how to take a disadvantage and make it an advantage, which is the whole point of an inversion hypothesis. What are the weaknesses in your way of operating at the moment? What are the disadvantages? All of those things can be turned into advantages if you're willing to think about them differently. The second thing is, what can you deny? Now, this is simple, but it's profound because nobody wants to do it. We all have critical ingredients, critical factors in our business, our way of operating that we expect have to be there in order for us to be successful. In strategy, we even have an acronym for it, which means they do exist, critical success factors. Deny these things, take them out, negate them. It doesn't mean they won't be in your way of operating, your project or your solution at the end, but it means you have to get rid of them at the start to free yourself up to think about how else you could deliver value. If we go back to the rental car example, see the customer, they fill out paperwork, rent cars by the day. What if we didn't have to see the customer? There was no paperwork to fill out and no cars available by the day. And this, of course, was before Uber. Zipcar took the car sharing model from Europe, gave it their own spin in America, subscription-based model. The great thing about any disruptive strategy is the more unexpected your idea, the fewer the number of competitors, which gives you a longer lead time in which to establish brand loyalty, new customer base, whatever other metrics are important to your success. You'll literally leave competitors scrambling to catch up. And then finally, what can you scale? We all have such an inbuilt sense of proportion, how tall something should be in relationship to something else, how many of something you should have in contrast to something else. Exaggerate the scale of these things. What's free that can be made expensive? What's expensive that can be made free? If a project takes, I don't know, $60 billion in 6 years, how can you do that with, $1 billion in 6 months? Exaggerate the scale of these things. I used to work at Frog Design. We did a lot of work with Apple, and this guy, Jonah, wasn't happy with that. He wanted to be an entrepreneur. Didn't want to design for Apple or anyone else. So he was out to dinner with other wannabe entrepreneurs, and this is what they do. They sit around thinking about how to attack lazy, slow-moving industries. They got onto apparel for some reason, got onto socks. Somebody at the table said, "It's so boring that socks have always been sold in pairs. Wouldn't it be crazy if somebody started selling socks in sets of 3? Now, it has to be said that everyone at the table that evening, thought this was the dumbest idea they'd ever heard. Why? Because anybody who's had any management or business expertise, you can't help it. You've been trained in analytical, logical rigor, and you want to judge that idea as good or bad as soon as possible because of the gratification that brings and the decisiveness that demonstrates. So they're sitting around thinking about it. Somebody at the table says, "You know what? The market for 3-legged people is really small." So the idea gets dismissed by everyone except Jonah. In Jonah's mind, the sock category is completely ripe for disruption. So he left Frog Design that start experimenting with an idea. He called, little mismatched. And this is what they do. They sell socks in sets of 3 and none of them match. You can't buy them in pairs no matter how hard you try. But it's not enough just to have a disruptive hypothesis about how you could do something completely different in your business and industry. Disruption for disruption's sake, as I said before, it's just annoying. It has to deliver value. But the only way you're going to find that out is finding ways to run small-scale, low-cost pilots and experiments. Only after doing that did Jonah discover that 8 to 12-year-old girls love socks that don't match. In fact, they love a lot of things that don't match. So they started selling mismatching pajamas, furniture, toys, got a big round of VC capital, $20 million in the first 3 years, opened 6 retail outlets with 150 employees, made 4 millionaires of the people sipping beers at dinner that night. Not bad off the strength of one disruptive hypothesis. Now, what was the problem that they solved? There wasn't one. It's not a problem to buy socks in pairs that match. And this is exactly why nobody was looking at the category in this way before. The other important part of this story is that the disruptive hypothesis, the disruptive thinking comes first. Then you go out and examine the context to see if it has value. Can you imagine doing this the traditional way, where you get all the data and the research and then you try and formulate your hypotheses? You get a room full of 8 to 12-year-old girls, you'd line them up, some middle-aged moderator would be there saying, "So girls, tell me, any problems with your socks?" Would never happen. Now, I've talked a lot about process today.